the sharp, deliberate sound of thick, watermarked paper being ripped down the middle cut through the low hum of the Oakmont Heritage Bank lobby. It was an unmistakable noise carrying an immediate sense of destruction. Behind the polished marble counter, Caroline Vance, the branch manager, held the two severed halves of the check. Her manicured fingers gripped the edges tightly, her chin raised in a posture of absolute, unyielding authority. She made sure to hold the pieces high enough so the woman standing opposite her could clearly see the ruined numbers. I have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior in my branch. Caroline announced, her voice projecting a practiced theatrical disappointment. We have strict security protocols for a reason. I am confiscating this fraudulent instrument before it causes any damage to our institution. Beside the counter, 7-year-old Maya flinched at the harsh tone. She instinctively reached up her small fingers, wrapping tightly around the worn fabric of her mother's coat. A few feet away, a junior teller named David stood, frozen with a stack of withdrawal slips in his hand. He stared at his manager, his mouth slightly open, a protest dying in his throat before it could even form. Caroline shot him a sharp sideways glare that communicated a clear threat regarding his continued employment. David lowered his gaze to the keyboard. Behind them, a line of well-dressed clients paused their conversations. A man adjusting his expensive silk tie muttered something under his breath about people attempting desperate scams. Sarah did not raise her voice. She stood in her faded gray sweater and scuffed boots, projecting a stillness that unsettled the air around her. She looked at the torn pieces of the $5 million draft. You just destroyed a certified document, Sarah stated, her tone remarkably even. I suggest you take some tape, put it back together, and run the routing number. Caroline scoffed, waving a hand toward the front doors. Security, escort them out, now. Sarah checked her watch. Her 3 o'clock appointment was exactly 1 minute away. If stories about exposing prejudice and demanding justice resonate with you, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. 6 hours earlier, the morning had begun with the smell of oatmeal and the sound of cartoons playing in a modest single-story house on the edge of the city. Sarah wiped down the kitchen counters, dressed in the same faded gray sweater she had owned for 5 years. To anyone looking at her driveway, which held a reliable but aging sedan, Sarah was just another working mother trying to make ends meet. Nobody in their quiet neighborhood knew that she was the sole founder and CEO of Apex Horizon, a commercial real estate empire currently valued in the billions. Sarah preferred it that way. She had grown up in a neighborhood where the power was frequently shut off, and she remembered the distinct shame of watching her own mother beg landlords for extra time. Wealth had not erased those memories. It had only clarified her priorities. She refused to raise Maya in a bubble of luxury, wanting her daughter to measure a person's worth by their character, not the logo stitched onto their collar. Are we going to the big building today, Mom? Maya asked, swinging her legs under the kitchen table. Sarah smiled, placing a thick manila envelope into her worn canvas tote bag. Yes, sweetheart, but first we have to make a quick stop at the bank. Inside that envelope rested a certified check for $5 million. It was the initial deposit required to formally launch the Horizon Housing Trust, a project Sarah had spent 2 years designing to provide zero-interest mortgages to single parents. Why the fancy bank downtown? Maya wrinkled her nose. Because the CEO asked to meet us there to sign the final papers, Sarah explained gently. Richard Sterling had practically begged for Apex Horizon's business, and Sarah had finally agreed to transfer a massive portion of her company's portfolio to Oakmont Heritage, provided they handled her nonprofit trust directly. They left the house feeling optimistic. It was supposed to be a simple drop-off, a quick handshake, and then a celebratory trip to get ice cream. Sarah had no idea that her faded sweater would soon become a target. The air inside Oakmont Heritage Bank was heavily conditioned, carrying the faint scent of expensive floor polish. The lobby was expansive, designed with towering glass windows and sleek mahogany desks that silently demanded reverence from anyone who walked through the doors. Holding Maya's hand, Sarah walked toward the teller line. From her elevated desk near the vault, Caroline Vance watched them enter. Caroline considered herself the guardian of Oakmont's prestigious reputation. She possessed a deeply ingrained habit of visually categorizing clients within 3 seconds. Seeing Sarah's scuffed boots, the frayed edges of her canvas bag, and the complete lack of designer branding, Caroline's expression instantly hardened into a mask of polite disdain. Sarah approached an open window where David offered a welcoming, albeit nervous, smile. "Hi there. How can I help you today?" David asked. "I have a deposit to make into a new trust account," Sarah said, sliding the envelope across the counter. Before David could open it, Caroline materialized beside him, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. She physically stepped in front of the young teller, pushing the envelope back towards Sarah. "David, please go inventory the safety deposit logs," Caroline instructed. Her tone was a command masquerading as a request. David hesitated. "I was just starting this transaction, Ms. Vance." "Now, David." She insisted, not looking at him. David reluctantly stepped away, leaving Sarah face to face with the manager. Caroline offered a tight, artificial smile. "We are currently prioritizing our premium account holders. If you need to cash a standard payroll check, you can use the automated machines in the vestibule." "It isn't a payroll check," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "It's a commercial deposit." Caroline sighed, clearly annoyed, and pulled the document from the envelope. Her eyes dropped to the number printed on the paper. $5 million. Caroline's posture stiffened. She looked from the check to Sarah's faded sweater, then down to Maya. Her mind immediately rejected the reality in front of her. "Where exactly did you obtain this?" Caroline asked, the artificial politeness vanishing completely. Sarah maintained her composure, recognizing the familiar shift in the manager's tone. "That is a certified draft issued directly from my corporate holdings. The routing and institution numbers are printed clearly at the bottom. You can verify it in your system." "I am not running a fabricated document through my network," Caroline countered, her voice elevating intentionally. She wanted the lobby to witness her diligence. "This is an obvious forgery." "It is entirely legitimate," Sarah said, placing her state ID and a corporate identification card on the counter. "A single phone call to the issuing bank will confirm the funds are real." "Oh, I'm sure," Caroline said loudly. Several clients turned away from their own transactions to watch. A woman in a tailored suit paused near the entrance, phone in hand. "People walk in here with printed garbage all the time, hoping we will clear a fraction of the funds before the system catches the fraud. It is an insult to our intelligence." Sarah felt Maya squeeze her fingers. She glanced around the lobby. 3 people had already raised their smartphones, recording the interaction. "Ms. Vance," Sarah said, reading the name tag pinned to the manager's lapel, "you are making a severe accusation based entirely on your personal assumptions. I have a scheduled meeting in this building. I suggest you make the verification call." "You do not dictate protocol to me," Caroline snapped, her pride stung by Sarah's unwavering calm. How dare this woman, looking like a charity case, speak to her with such quiet authority? "I am protecting my clients from liability," Caroline announced to the audience in the room. In a moment of absolute blinding arrogance, she grasped the edges of the heavy paper. "Wait," David whispered from the doorway of the back office. With a swift, aggressive motion, Caroline ripped the $5 million check apart. The sound echoed off the marble walls. She tore the halves again, letting the 4 pieces flutter down onto the counter. The lobby grew incredibly still. Maya gasped, hiding her face against her mother's leg. Sarah stared at the shredded remnants of the housing trust, feeling a cold certainty settle in her chest. "Security." Caroline's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. Marcus, the branch security guard, jogged over from his post by the main entrance. He looked deeply uncomfortable. He had watched the entire exchange and knew Sarah had not raised her voice or made a single threatening gesture. "Yes, Ms. Vance," Marcus asked, keeping his hands carefully away from his utility belt. "Remove this woman and her child from the premises," Caroline ordered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Sarah. "If she refuses to leave, contact law enforcement. We have her on camera attempting to pass a high-value fraudulent instrument." Marcus swallowed heavily. He looked at Sarah, and then down at the terrified little girl clinging to her leg. "Ma'am," Marcus said softly, his voice thick with reluctance. "Please, let's just walk outside. I don't want to make this worse for you or your daughter." Sarah looked at the guard, seeing the conflict etched into his features. I am not leaving until she is held accountable for destroying my property. Caroline stepped out from behind the teller station. Marcus, if you do not escort her out right now, I will call child services. She is clearly endangering a minor by dragging her into a criminal scheme. The atmosphere in the room instantly fractured. Sarah's calm exterior vanished, replaced by a fierce maternal intensity. She took one step forward, placing her body entirely between Caroline and Maya. Do not speak about my child, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. Caroline gasped, taking a theatrical step backward. Did you see that? She's aggressive. Marcus, grab her arm. Detain her. Marcus reached out his hand, hovering inches from Sarah's shoulder, desperately hoping she would just step back. Sarah held her ground, refusing to show fear in front of her daughter, while Caroline loudly narrated the fabricated threat to the recording onlookers. Just as Marcus's fingers brushed the fabric of Sarah's sweater, the heavy glass doors of the bank swung open. What on earth is happening here? A booming, authoritative voice demanded. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Richard Sterling, the CEO of Oakmont Heritage Bank, marched into the lobby, flanked by two frantic executives. His sharp eyes scanned the chaotic scene, the security guard reaching for a customer, the shredded paper on the counter, and his branch manager looking triumphant. Caroline immediately smoothed her skirt and hurried forward, a sickeningly eager smile appearing on her face. Mr. Sterling, we didn't expect you until 3, Caroline gushed. I apologize for the commotion. We were just managing a severe fraud attempt. This individual brought in a fake check, and I was simply protecting the bank's assets by having her removed. Quiet, Richard barked, not even glancing at her. His eyes were locked on the woman in the faded sweater. The color completely drained from Richard's face. He walked past Caroline, approaching Sarah with a posture that was entirely deferential. Ms. Sarah, Richard said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lobby. Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry. Are you and Maya all right? Caroline stopped breathing. The clients holding their phones slowly lowered their arms. Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. We are unharmed, Richard. However, my deposit was just destroyed. Caroline's mind scrambled frantically, trying to process the CEO's behavior. Ms. Sarah. She searched her memory for the name of the executive they were expecting. The founder of Apex Horizon. The billionaire investor saving their regional portfolio. Mr. Sterling, Caroline stammered, her voice high and panicked. She didn't meet the profile. She didn't identify herself as a premium client. I was strictly following our security policy. Richard finally turned to look at Caroline, his eyes blazing with absolute fury. Policy. What policy dictates that you tear a certified bank draft without verifying it? What standard allows you to threaten the majority stakeholder of our largest commercial partner? Caroline stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the counter. Majority stakeholder. Explain to me, Richard demanded, his voice echoing off the marble. Which protocol gave you the right to treat this woman like a criminal? Caroline opened her mouth, but her voice completely failed her. Panic set in, sharp and desperate. Caroline realized that decades of climbing the corporate ladder were disintegrating in front of her eyes. The system flagged it, Caroline cried out frantically, pointing at the teller station. The internal risk software flagged her profile. I was only acting on the digital alert. She spun around and darted behind the counter, rushing toward David's terminal. If she could log in and quickly alter the interaction code to show a high-risk system alert, she might create a sliver of deniability. She just needed to erase the record of Sarah's valid ID scan. Don't let her touch that computer, Sarah said calmly. Before Richard could issue an order, David moved. The young teller, who had spent the last 20 minutes paralyzed by fear, stepped directly in front of the keyboard, blocking Caroline's path. Move out of my way, David, Caroline hissed, attempting to shove his shoulder. No, David said, his voice shaking but loud enough for the executives to hear. I won't let you alter the logs. I swiped her state ID when she first walked up. The system verified her identity and the routing number instantly. You overrode my screen before I could show you. Caroline stared at him, horrified by the defiance. You are fired. Pack your desk. He is not fired, Richard said, stepping behind the counter. But you are Caroline, instantly. Surrender your keys and step away from the desk. We will be pulling the security footage and auditing every single denial you have issued this year. Defeated Caroline stepped back. The arrogant authority she had worn like armor was gone, leaving her looking small and terrified. She turned towards Sarah, tears welling in her eyes. Please, ma'am. Caroline pleaded, her voice trembling. I worked 30 years for my pension. Don't ruin my life over a misunderstanding. Sarah looked at the shredded pieces of the housing trust on the counter. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Caroline. You made a conscious choice to humiliate me, assuming I lacked the power to defend myself. By the time the sun set, the incident had spiraled far beyond the walls of the bank. Multiple videos from the lobby had been uploaded online, spreading rapidly. The sight of a bank manager tearing a $5 million check while a terrified child watched ignited a firestorm of public outrage. Yet inside Sarah's quiet home, the noise of the internet felt distant. Sarah sat on the edge of Maya's bed, smoothing the blankets. The adrenaline of the afternoon had faded, leaving behind a heavy, lingering exhaustion. She had received a dozen frantic apologies from Richard Sterling, but the victory felt hollow. Maya lay quietly staring up at the ceiling. She had barely spoken since they left the building. Are you okay, sweetheart? Sarah asked, brushing a stray curl from Maya's forehead. Maya frowned, processing a thought that seemed too heavy for a 7-year-old. She finally turned to look at her mother. Mom, Maya asked softly, if they didn't know you owned the big company, would that lady still be yelling at us? The question struck Sarah with physical force. She closed her eyes, the truth of her daughter's observation wrapping around her throat. Maya was right. If Sarah had actually been the struggling mother she appeared to be, Richard Sterling would not have walked through those doors to save her. Marcus would have dragged her out. The police would have been called. She would have been publicly humiliated, arrested, and robbed of her dignity, all because of the clothes on her back. The system had not corrected an injustice. It had only bowed to her extreme wealth. Firing Caroline Vance was not justice. It was merely a display of power. The prejudice that fueled the incident was still alive, baked into the rules of the institution, waiting for the next vulnerable person to walk inside. You're right, Maya. Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. If I wasn't who I am, nobody would have stopped her. And that is exactly why we aren't done fighting. 2 days later, Sarah sat at the head of a long glass conference table in Oakmont Heritage's corporate headquarters. Richard Sterling sat opposite her, flanked by the bank's top legal counsel and crisis management team. The lead attorney slid a thick leather-bound folder across the glass. Miss Sarah, the lawyer began, offering a polished practice smile. Oakmont is prepared to offer you $3 million in personal compensation for the emotional distress caused by our former employee. In exchange, we simply ask that you sign this non-disclosure agreement to help us quiet the press. Sarah didn't touch the folder. She looked at Richard. Keep the money. I am not signing an NDA, and I am not accepting a payout. Richard shifted nervously. Sarah, please. The stock is taking a massive hit. Name your price. My price is structural, Sarah replied. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her canvas bag and placed it on the table. These are my conditions for keeping Apex Horizons assets within your institution. The lawyers leaned forward. First, an independent third-party audit of every account frozen or denied by Caroline Vance over the last decade. Any client wrongly targeted will receive full compensation. Richard nodded slowly. Agreed. Second, Sarah continued, you will completely overhaul your verification protocols. No single manager will have the unilateral authority to confiscate documents or call law enforcement on a client without secondary approval from corporate compliance. That changes our entire operational flow, a lawyer protested. Then change it, Sarah said flatly. Third David is to be promoted to assistant manager, and his student loans will be paid in full by this bank. Your security guard Marcus will receive a commendation for restraint, not a penalty. You will implement and strictly enforce whistleblower protections so your staff never has to choose between their morals and their paycheck. Richard looked at the list, realizing she wasn't asking for revenge. She was demanding evolution. Without hesitation, he picked up his pen and signed the document. 6 months later, the glass doors of the Oakmont Heritage branch swung open. Sarah and Maya walked inside. Sarah wore the same faded sweater, completely unbothered by the aesthetics of the wealthy lobby. The oppressive, judgmental silence that once choked the room was gone. Behind the manager's desk sat David, looking sharp, in a new suit, though he retained his warm, approachable demeanor. When he saw Sarah, he immediately stood up, crossing the lobby, to greet them with genuine respect. "Sarah, Maya, it's wonderful to see you both." David smiled, shaking Sarah's hand. "You too, David. The branch feels entirely different," Sarah noted. As they spoke, Sarah watched a young man in worn construction clothes approach the teller counter. He looked nervous, holding a stack of crumpled papers. The teller didn't judge his boots or his posture. She smiled warmly, offered him a seat, and patiently walked him through the process of opening his first business account. There was no suspicion. There was only service. Maya watched the interaction, a small smile forming on her face. She looked up at her mother, understanding that the fight had been worth it. "Ready?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Maya said. She reached into Sarah's bag and pulled out a thick white envelope. She walked over to the young man in the construction clothes, who was a single father applying for the newly established Horizon Housing Trust. Maya handed him the envelope containing the approval for his zero-interest mortgage. True victory did not belong to the wealthy who could force an apology. True victory was using that power to permanently prop open the door for everyone else who came behind you. If you had been standing in that bank lobby, would you have stayed silent behind your phone, or would you have been the first to speak up against the injustice? Dignity is not a privilege reserved for the rich. It is a right owed to everyone. Let us know how you would have reacted in the comments below. If this story made you think, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about justice, courage, and true equality.